So, for tonight, actually for the foreseeable future, uh, we're going to be going through kind of a series. The religion and control message was kind of just the start, as we're going to be going over a series talking about different spirits, gods even, specifically. And what I mean by that are demons who have been framed um, in that role. Uh, to use a more familiar term, principalities. Now, when I talk about these spirits, like I might refer to, say, Aphrodite, which is like the subject of tonight. But when I say that, I'm referring to like an archetype of spirits, because the thing about demons in particular is that there are more than one demon representing a thing. So, a familiar thing in the church is to hear people talk about Jezebel spirits, right? But we oftentimes make the mistake of thinking that there's just one spirit associated with that. So people think, oh, well, if this is Jezebel, I'm going to cast Jezebel out, and it doesn't go. And that's because it's a different spirit. It has a different name. It's an archetype. They do the same thing. There's lots of different there's lots of different demons who are spirits of despair or depression or anxiety or different things like that. And they all do the same thing. It's just usually there's one kind of a face. There's one who kind of sits over the top. One powerful demon who's kind of in charge of that group. In this case, we end up talking about Aphrodite. Aphrodite is the one in charge in terms of lust. Because tonight, what we're talking about is Aphrodite and spirits of lust. Another thing to clarify is that not all like conditions of the heart are caused by demons. Okay? At least not directly. And I want to be clear on that as we progress, because there are some things that we will talk about over the course of the next few weeks where they're not they're not exactly like things that demons did. This isn't the product of temptation or spirits whispering in your ears or projecting things into your mind or whatever. This is a condition of circumstance, or it's an indirect thing where it's a propagated lie that has become so prevalent and so consistent and so clear and common that we all tend to believe it, or at least it's widely believed to be or accepted. And that's the thing, is like, and that's important to understand, that there are indirect things that the enemy has done throughout the church, throughout the world at large, because they are trying to affect the world at large. And the thing about it is that when we talked about spiritual warfare a few years ago, we talked about the way that demons will oftentimes set up principalities. Because one thing we need to understand about demons is their numbers are not infinite. When it refers to a third of the heavens being, a third of the stars falling to the earth. Well, okay, to be completely clear, in Revelation, John sees the dragon whip its tail and pulls with it a third of the stars from the sky. And that was a reference to the demons who fell, the angels who fell with Satan. And those stars became his demons. Now, the exact number is unknown, but we know that there's 2 angels for every demon, and more importantly, there is a limit to the number of demons that exist. So, as a result of that, you will often have demons who set themselves up, especially like the larger, more powerful demons. They will set themselves up in principalities, oftentimes creating entire kind of realms, spheres of influence that they oversee and control. And they don't have to be like areas of land. In the past, back in the day, you had whole regions who were dedicated to like a god. And talking about Aphrodite, that ends up being incredibly relevant because Aphrodite was a very prolific god in the old world. Aphrodite was worshipped in Greece, in Rome under the name Venus, was worshipped in all throughout Persia, Greece, and northern Africa after the expansion of Greece under Alexander the Great. The temples of Aphrodite spread as well. And Aphrodite continued to be worshipped for years and years after the Hellenic kingdoms all fell, after Rome took them over, after Persia took them over. Like those regions fell, and then these two kingdoms rose up, but the gods stayed. And people continued to venerate Aphrodite as a god and worship Aphrodite as a god. And in that way, that demon, represented by this god, continued to maintain its realms of influence all throughout that region. And the reason why a lot of demons do that, they set up these realms of influence because it makes it easier for them to interact, to affect people. Why spend all of your energy running around back and forth to try to tempt people and mess with people when you can just have the people come to you and worship you in the way that, in whatever twisted way you want to be worshipped? And Aphrodite is certainly one that brought a very twisted form of worship. So, just so we're clear, just to kind of like define things, not all issues that lead to sin are the direct result of demons. And principalities are created because of demons' limits, in truth. They're interdimensional beings, but they are individual beings. And they can only move about through space and time as individual beings. So, if Aphrodite is the overseer of all spirits of lust, then that's fine. But there's only one. There's only one Aphrodite, and then all of her ilk, if you will. The others like her, who she oversees. So, just to kind of like define a few things and kind of lay that out there, we want to clarify this as we kind of progress forward. And this will be relevant for the other messages, because God gave me a list. There is a list. I think next week's abandonment and spirits of abandonment. But for this week, it's Aphrodite and spirits of lust. So let's talk about Aphrodite for a minute, specifically. Aphrodite as a god actually has multiple different names. And Aphrodite, to be clear, is not a god. Purely a demon that has been able to acquire that role in multiple different circumstances. And the interesting thing about it is the way in which they choose to be worshipped is maintained throughout various places in the old world. It's interesting in a way that when you look around, you see that going back as far as the Babylonian kingdoms and possibly even the Sumerian kingdoms, they venerated a god that required sex as part of temple worship. Like, the thing about it was that they worshipped different gods. Ishtar was the first. And there's some debate over whether Aphrodite or Ishtar are representative of this spirit, who really is like the powerhouse of them, who's the strong man, to put it in the phrasing that a lot of Christians will. But it is, Ishtar is just another name. And then another example is, and just to be like one of those things, Ishtar, Aphrodite, Freya, even from Norse mythology, same being. The thing about it is that in each case, this god is claimed to be a representative of love. This demon manifests in its way and claims to be a goddess of love. And in all cases where it's represented, it's like that. It propagates this kind of idea. But that's ultimately just like the cover for it. See, the truth is that when you get into like the realities of worship and what that looked like, one of the biggest things that you will find consistently throughout the old world and throughout the various cultures where she's represented, they all worship the same way, and that is through sex. And not the act of having sex with your partner on your own, but going to the temple and having sex with temple prostitutes. Back in the olden days, in whether it be the temples of Ishtar or Astarte, I think was the other one. So for the Babylonians, it was Ishtar. For the Phoenicians, it was Astarte. For the Greeks, it was Aphrodite. For the Romans, it was Venus. For the Scandinavians, it was Freya, and I can't remember the Celtic god's name. But it's just all over the place. There were gods of fertility, and there were gods of fertility and love that all fell into the same category and were venerated the same way. And it was this very expositional kind of thing. And oftentimes the mythology around them would very much echo that kind of character, because their emphasis was not on loving people. Okay, it wasn't about the love that you find with a partner, a significant other who you aim to marry, but rather it was instead it was a veneration of sex. Even though Aphrodite was a goddess of love, love as an emotional interaction between two people was not often what was represented by her. And instead you get stories of like flagrant cheating and entanglements with other beings, and the mythology is just all over the place in every case. But that's representative of this spirit and what it actually does. See, while love might be what's presented and what's being offered, love is not what happens. The reality of Aphrodite as a spirit and all the lust spirits around her that are beneath her is one of carnal, self-seeking. She preys on people's insecurities and doubts and pushes everybody towards a more apathetic approach to life, and especially to love. Even some of the ideas that we have in the world right now are things propagated by this spirit. And I want to be clear about something, is that sometimes we'll end up talking about Jezebel as a spirit at some point here, I'm sure. But one of the problems one of the distinctions to make between Jezebel and Aphrodite is how they interact with people. Jezebel, they're both seductive spirits. They will both lure you in with things like sex and good feelings and relationship even. But what they bring you into is very different. What their end goals are very different. Spirits of lust and Aphrodites and whatnot, they will take you down a more apathetic, more carnal road. Everything is meant to be. They'll lure you in with the idea of expanding your mind, or gaining experience, or, needing things in order to be validated. And we'll get more into that. Whereas Jezebel is more. If Aphrodite is more carnal and focused on the feeling good, Jezebel is much more ambitious. Jezebel wants something and will use these things to get you there. Is very possessive, very jealous, very aggressive, and will destroy you. Whereas Aphrodite doesn't care. Aphrodite comes with a certain apathetic aspect to her character and what she tries to lure people into. She's going to take you down a path that will make you give up and stop caring, and not in a healthy way, but rather in a way that leaves you broken down and not caring about life at all, period. With a history of broken relationships, broken bonds, loss, grief, failure, disappointment, and ultimately a self-hatred that just leaves you not caring about what happens to you as you just seek whatever good thing, whatever good feeling you can find comes next. And it's not just sex either. Aphrodite will cause you to pursue any number of different carnal pleasures, even drugs, things like that. Like, these are all within her wheelhouse, because she will use whatever she needs to take you to that place, or spirits of hers. The thing about all of this is that, one would ask what followers of Aphrodite, of spirits of lust, look like. Those who are afflicted by these spirits, they're not like, you might assume, like the temptress who's going to like try to lure you into like a toxic relationship, and that's more of the Jezebel thing. No, these are the kind of women, these are the kind of people who, they're being drugged into these places because Aphrodite spirits, they want you to try new things in a way. They're going to take you on to expand yourself in a way. And they're going to prey on your insecurities, or you're not wanting to be, like, look bad. So what they're going to feed you is that you need this, whatever they're offering, in order for you to be a better person in some way, in order for you to be a freer person, in order for you to be validated. And to be specific in all of those kinds of things. There's the argument these days that, like, you need to become an experienced lover, for example, because sex is all about exposition. You have to have a lot of sex. You have to go out and have a lot of sex in order to get good at it. I mean, you have heard this, no doubt. You have to look this way. You have to be, what is the term? You have to have hit the genetic lottery in certain departments in order to be a good enough lover. And if you haven't, then you need to find a way to increase the size of those things. You need to do better. You need to be better at this in order to have it. And if you can't, well, then what are you doing? Just give up.
Just say you have to be like Brad Pitt.
Sure, you have to be that attractive, that smooth. So you have to like work on making yourself look better. It's going to play on, it's going to create a need for vanity. It's going to create a need for, and the need is completely manufactured. There's no need for any of this. The idea that you have the need for sex in the first place is also completely fabricated. Like, people will tell you and people will argue with this statement, and that's fine. But understand, like, there are millions of people before us who took vows of celibacy. You know, there were nuns and monks and hermits and all kinds of people in the past who took and said, no, I'm done. I'm going to turn away from this and spend the rest of my life devoted to some cause or some mentality or something. I mean, Theravada Buddhism is entirely, it moves towards a more monastic state as you develop in your path to enlightenment, and ultimately you find yourself in a place where you will give up these things. Like, you will take a vow of celibacy because that's part of reaching enlightenment. And it's really interesting, isn't it, to consider that. But we have to consider the fact that when we hear something like that, there's entire civil cultures, entire religions, entire other cultures that exist in a state where that's not true. Well, there's a reason for that. And it's because they're not under that same lie that we are. Like, a lot of the fun, a lot of the frustrating things with these circumstances is that they're lies that have been propagated in such a way that they've been spread around our culture to the point that we obsess over it. I mean, just the sheer obsession with sex in Western civilization is absurd. If you go to places there are places all over the world that you can go to where they're nowhere near where we're at. There are also some that are maybe a little even less reserved than us, but the reality of it is that it's just such a it's pushed so hard into the forefront of everybody's mind. If you're not having sex, then you're a fool. If you're not having sex, then it's because there's something wrong with you. If you're not having sex, if you can't find somebody to have sex with, there's something wrong with you. You need to change that. These are the kinds of lies that we're told on a routine basis, that you're not good. If you don't have somebody that you're in a relationship with, then you're wrong. Everything's wrong with you because you're alone. And that's the thing, is the lies start to pile up, and you start to feel like you need these things. One of the biggest things is that you need to be wanted. And that's one of the big lies that spirits of lust will project and push, because it can hit on even innocent places and corrupt them, so that you find yourself in a state where you're saying, wow, I'm not good enough. Like, I need to have somebody else want me in order to have the validation of thinking that I'm good enough as a person. Because if no one wants me, I'm not good enough. And that's not true. That's not even remotely true. It's also not true that, nobody wants you just because this one person who you feel pushed to go after doesn't, or these few people who you feel pushed to go after didn't. If you're facing rejection over and over again, sometimes that's not because you're not good enough. Sometimes it's because of circumstances around you. I remember when I was younger, I did the good Christian thing. I stayed a virgin until I got married. And the truth is that I had circumstances where I had people I had girls that I tried to get together with, I tried to go out with, because I was in love with one of them in particular. And she would never say it to my face, but she wouldn't go out with me because I was a virgin. But it wasn't even that. It was because she she felt that sex was incredibly important to the relationship, that it was like a like the gate that created the entryway to the relationship, as it were. Whereas I believed that love was more important, and establishing a emotional relationship. And this was where we could not meet. So she never really gave me a chance on those grounds. And in retrospect, that's fine. But this was the reality that I had to face within the situation at this time. And I remember just being bewildered by this idea, where I was like, so we can't, you believe that you couldn't have a relationship with somebody if you can't have sex with them, because what matters most is the physical part of the relationship. Like, what happens when you get old and can't do it anymore? Do you just move on and find somebody who can? Or, like, how do you do that? And that's the thing, is that ultimately, if you really, when you stop and actually look at everything that's being offered here from a wider perspective, it's all facile. See, spirits of lust are facile beings. They're going to drag you into a place of looking at the world in a short-term perspective. And that's where they get you. That's where they really try to draw you in, because they want you to think about things in these terms of, I need this now. My life is going to come to an end. My place here is going to come to an end. I need this now, otherwise I'm not going to be, I don't want to be this, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be a 30-year-old virgin. I don't want to be a 30-year-old singleton. I want to be married by the age of 24. Otherwise, they create these kinds of lies that you need to achieve these things, and like somehow it makes you a lower kind of person if you don't accomplish this. Because in the end, what they're telling you is that in order to be a worthwhile human being, you need these things. You need to look good enough. You need to have a partner. You need to have had sex. You need to do all these different things. You need to try drugs. You need to do gain these experiences in order to be valid. In all of it, they try to make you seek validation from other things beyond just being who you are. And in that, they're going to make you lose yourself, because that is the ultimate game plan. Aphrodite as a spirit, and I talk about this because I have personal experience with Aphrodite specifically. Like, I've had interactions with different demons in my past, both in terms of when I was a Satanist and even more so afterwards, when, just serving God for the last, it's been 11 years now. It's been a long time. But, my kind of entry into that arena was specifically dealing with spiritual warfare and casting off demons and dealing with demons on a routine basis. And I have specifically had to cast Aphrodite off of places when she has established principality. I had to cast her spirits of lust off of people on a routine basis. It's not an uncommon thing. But the reality of it is that lust spirits, they don't tend to stick around and afflict people. They tend to come and go. It's not like a spirit of shame or even control. When we talked about control last time, control will linger. And the thing about it is that you gotta understand, a lot of spirits will come in groups. So even though lust spirits tend not to linger with somebody, they will kind of move about here and there. They'll flip throughout people and kind of project an image, offer a temptation, and seed ideas into your mind that feed on insecurity. They feed on your loneliness. They feed on different parts of of you struggling with your own life and the natural need of that a human being has to not be alone. But they're going to focus you in on very specific things and make you feel like you need those specific things instead of just companionship. But the the thing about it is that, and that is, just to be like very clear, that is the need that we have. Every human being needs companionship. I want to pause there and just like talk about that for a moment, because that's not an evil thing. Companionship doesn't need to look like a physical or emotional relationship in terms of like a romantic sense, though. Companionship can just be like really close friends, a group of close friends, and that can be good enough. The only person trying to convince you that it's not is specifically the spirit that we're talking about today. And sometimes, you know, you do want somebody, a partner to share life with, and there's nothing wrong with that either. It's when it becomes an obsession that you have to start wondering if maybe there's something wrong, or if it becomes something that you are afraid of. That's a whole other topic. Actually, it's not. We'll get there. We'll talk about that, because we're kind of in this particular realm right now. Because see, the thing about it is that anyway, sticking to the focus right now, looking for companionship in those terms, the need for companionship is a normal thing for every one of us. That's something that's God-given. We're meant to be beings that exist in community, right? Like, that's how we're created. The way that this gets twisted, though, that's where you have to start asking questions about, am I being afflicted by a spirit? Am I being afflicted by something that's trying to make me obsess over this or find my validation in it? And that's a problem. Like, see, to kind of like draw that comparison with Jezebel, like a Jezebel spirit will draw you into a bad relationship where you're being like abused even, and get you to stay there, because that's the one that will tell you, it will feed on your ambition. If your need is to get married, right, it will prey on that ambition, and it will say, you need to stick with this person because it's your only chance. So you're going to get stuck in repetitive cycles with this person who hurts you again and again and again. The thing about it is that I mentioned just a little bit ago, like, about how spirits often team up. Aphrodite and Jezebel will team up, and they'll work together to push you. Shame is another big one that will work with lust spirits. Like, they will team up every time, especially for Christians, because like the reality of it is that, like, let's say that you believe the claim that you're a man and you have needs, and you're alone, and you have a computer screen and a Google search, or maybe a couple of links. Yeah, that the thing that you're believing that's got you like looking at that stuff quietly alone in the dark by yourself, that's an affliction by a spirit of lust. Because you don't need that specifically. The whole concept, it's all constructed. And what's more is, after you do it, after you commit to what you're kind of plotting to do, that's when the shame's going to come. And those spirits of shame will tell you how disgusting you are, and how pitiful, and how alone you are. And they will use every possible thing they can to make you beat yourself up over everything that you just did. because that's how demons tear us down. They play these games. Unless spirits don't care. Like one of the big, like I said earlier, like apathy. There's an apathetic approach that is tantamount to really recognizing what kind of a spirit you're dealing with. They end up being like fairly easy to cast off in a way, a lot of the time, because they don't care. Like they're apathetic. Even the spirits themselves are ultimately more carnal in their approach. Their interest is in, they show up, they do their thing as long as it feels good. And they are very self-seeking in that way, even more so than a lot of other demons, to the point that they're not going to stick around. And the thing about it is that with Aphrodite herself as a spirit, Aphrodite loves to be worshipped. She loves to create situations where people are doing things around her, whether in the past it was her temple prostitutes, but now if there is a particular principality that she runs the show on, it would be the porn industry. That reeks of her and everything about her and the spirits attached to her. Because see, I pause for a moment to talk about what's healthy, what's normal, to seek companionship, to want relationship. That's normal. But what she does with this is she takes what is meant to be, and sex is meant to be something that's shared by, it's the most intimate physical act that two people can have together. And she's going to take that and make it and exploit it, make it into a show. It's not going to cease to be something meaningful, and it's going to become entertainment. Whether it's out in front of you on your TV screen or your computer screen or phone screen or whatever, or whether it's even how you live your life. Because see, that's the other thing. She will either make you need that relationship, or she will make you run from relationship, because what you need is validation. I reference validation as being like a key thing here. Validation is enormous. It is an enormous tool in her belt that she will use every single time. And that you can see a lot of people in life who are struggling with this need for validation. It's why you've got so many girls with OnlyFans accounts. On some level, a lot of them are selling their nudes and whatnot because they want the validation of knowing that lots of people want them. There are lots of men working very hard, going to the gym, doing different things like that, and it's purely, they spend all of that time on themselves purely because they need the validation of being wanted. Because that's huge. Being wanted is a thing that every human being has. We want to be accepted. We want to be loved. But spirits like this one, what they do is they take that need and they twist it. And they say, this is how you're going to get it. And it's always something facile. The only way you're going to get it is by being attractive, by taking your clothes off and then sending it to every guy that you know. And then the ones that respond, those are the ones that want you, keep doing it. That means you're meaningful. Go work out really hard. Go shave everything. Go do whatever you need to do in order to look good enough for girls. Maybe take some pills on the side. Whatever you need to do to be good enough for them, go do it, because you need to be wanted by them. If they don't want you, you're meaningless. You're scum. You need to prove that you're good enough to everybody else around you. And they will make you crave that validation. And sometimes the way that you get wanted is by going around and looking as often as you can. Because lust spirits will take you on that journey too, where you're constantly just out hooking up with everybody that you can. Not because you need it, but because you think you do. On some level, the need for validation is so significant that you'll push yourself into these situations again and again and again. And you end up with all these people who have been hurt by you, or you've hurt, or that you've been hurt by. Because maybe the validation was really good. Maybe you actually started to feel something. Maybe you got like close to this person and you really started to love them or care about them. But then they didn't want you because it was supposed to be a casual thing. Or maybe you hurt them because it was supposed to be a casual thing. And lo and behold, you now find yourself in the situation where, you have a lot of things that you're ashamed of. You never needed to, but here it is. This is another state that they will put you in. And in all cases, in every circumstance around this, the aim is to wear you down. Because in the end, if spirits like Jezebel will aim to like destroy you, lust spirits and spirits of Aphrodite aim to let you destroy yourself. Aphrodite doesn't care. She's not going to spend exorbitant amounts of time trying to destroy you. She's gonna tempt you. She's going to make you think that you need these things. She's gonna lie to you. She's gonna push and pull you. But she's not gonna stick around and care. She's gonna open the door for other demons, like shame and guilt, like Jezebel, even some even more nefarious ones. Satan himself will at times team up with this one, spread more lies, and just lie and lie and lie. Even spirits of control. Like, if the thing about it is that one of the big tools that she uses, another one, is openness and being open. And Baal. Baal is probably the most nefarious one that she will team up with. And we will talk about him and those associated with him, because that is a whole other topic. That's one that requires its own hour or so. But the thing about Aphrodite's like move of using openness as a way to like get you. How many times have you heard people say, don't shame somebody's kink, even though what they're doing is really disgusting. And that's not coming from a perspective of like a white Christian man. That's coming from anybody who sees what they're doing says, okay. And you get that that hard to squeeze out mode of acceptance where somebody says, yeah, you do you, man, but the face looks like this. Because you can't look any other way at it. When I hear about the guy who likes to have sex with bugs, and Vice does a whole special on him, and everyone's just like, yeah, okay, until somebody brings up the fact that, well, do they consent to that? Because I don't think there's a way for them to communicate consent. And then it becomes really, really uncomfortable. But this whole concept of the construct of openness, and it's good to be open to new experiences to an extent. when everything in you is screaming not to do something, it's usually a good idea to not. And sometimes it's a trap. In fact, it oftentimes is a trap. You know, as members, as believers in Jesus, you know, we have a line of thought and reference in order to kind of understand what something is, when something is wrong and when it is not. And to be clear, like, you know, one thing about this whole series is that there aren't a lot of scriptures describing these spirits. So there aren't going to be a lot of times that I'm like pulling open the Bible to give you examples. I mean, if you want an example of the reference to temple prostitutes, the only time it really comes up specifically is in Deuteronomy. I think it's 24. Oh, 23, 7, starting in verse 17. No Israelite man or woman is to become a shrine prostitute. It's when Moses is laying out the law. There's also references to like adultery and different things like that in Matthew. I mean, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus specifically highlights adultery as being like one of the greatest sins that one can do in terms of lust. And the reality is that like spirits of Aphrodite and whatnot, they're usually the ones behind adultery. I didn't get to talk about that as much as I would like to, but to pause there for just a second, and even though it's a little bit of a bunny trail, given the subject that we're on at the moment, a lot of people who commit adultery, they're being influenced by these spirits when it comes down to it. And that's, again, like I said before, not everything is by these demons specifically, but when it is, these are the guys doing it. And that comes from those lies about needing to be wanted. Like, there are a lot of men who I've known who have committed adultery on their wives, and a lot of wives who have committed adultery on their men. And the story ends up being the same. It's that they felt unwanted. They felt unappreciated. And as a result, it was easy for them to fall prey to this particular thing. And it's really bad. Like, they destroyed their families because they needed that validation. And it's horrible. It's legitimately terrible. But it was these same lies that I've just been like exposing here and putting out in front of you guys that were exactly what were used in order to put them in these positions, and that the ramifications of that, like I said, spirits of lust won't try to destroy you, but they will push you to destroy yourself. And that's the way they do it. They're not gonna like sit there and like continue to feed you similar lies or things like that. You'll use those lies to justify why you did what you did. I was alone, you know, I was looking at porn because I'm a man, I have needs. And God's not going to fulfill those needs. So I have to do it myself. Or, you know, a moment I shared those pictures, I did those things because, you know, it made me feel good. It made me feel wanted. And that's what mattered. I needed to be wanted. Again, it takes these basic things, these basic normal human things, and it twists them and focuses our direction into a place, and as a result, we'll send ourselves right down that path of destruction easy. And we'll walk it, we'll live it, we'll survive it, and then we'll justify it. But in all cases, as Christians, we have a very clear guideline. In Matthew 19, Jesus actually very much expresses this point. Let's see, it starts in verse 3. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" Jesus responds, "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them, male and female, and said, 'For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh.' So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." And we can continue on with the topic of, like, where they fight with them about divorce and so on. But the reality is that those lines right there, when Jesus references that, he references that multiple times. It's referenced in the Bible multiple times that this is what marriage is meant to look like. There is no, when Jesus specifies this point, yes, he's referencing it in response to people asking about divorce, but that's also just the reference. Jesus oftentimes will point people back to the most basic principle. You want to follow all the rules of the Bible? Here, it's simple. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and likewise love your neighbor as yourself. That covers all the commands in the Bible. He simplifies these things down for this purpose, because following God is actually really simple. When he responds to the Pharisees, he responds with this. This is what marriage looks like. Are you unaware of that? It looks no other way, and that's how it's meant to be. These two people become one entity, one person. That's the way it's meant to look. Anything outside of that, you end up falling into sin. So for us as Christians, we have that guideline to look at. And you can claim it's rigid, you can claim whatever you want, and that's fine. You're free to. But when it comes down to talking about our interactions and the war that we are fighting in the spiritual, and this particular enemy who attacks that specific thing, who turns it into, whose entire foundation for attacking it is to create a mockery of it. When you have a spirit who is demanding things like who is demanding sex with prostitutes at their temple in order to consider themselves worshipped, when they're demanding orgies as part of their festivals and rituals. And an even bigger thing to consider about this is, like, people might say, well, if they're consenting, then that's fine. Is it consent if you're being told that you have to do this in order to, like, practice this religion? And even more so than that, you have to understand that the people who worked as shrine prostitutes were not always there because they were hired or whatever. One particular story that I read that was alarming was under one of the rulers during the antiquities, during the Hellenistic period, after Alexander expanded Greece's power, and we had that whole Hellenic period where, you know, everyone was speaking Greek in those times. One of the rulers of the time, Xenophon, he wanted a massive celebration in order to, because of one of his great victories. And they specify the fact that the temple of Aphrodite offered up 100 of their shrine prostitutes as part of the ritual, as part of the celebration. The thing that's also specified, though, is those people were all slaves. They The shrine prostitutes were all slaves who were forced into that work. And that's the thing, is that when I say, when talking about this, when specifying the point, I bring up the openness concept, because you need to understand that this spirit is not opening you up to new experiences for the purpose of having you become a more knowledgeable person or a more understanding person or any of those things. The aim of this demon and any other demon associated with her is to open you up to other things, other demons. If there is one thing that Aphrodite does, that spirits of lust like Aphrodite do for the kind of like, for the grander schemes of Satan and his allies, is that they open you up to situations where the other ones can come in and attack you. They're the ones that are best at it, because they lure you in with the temptation of things that you want, that you want, and feel you need. And they'll even propagate those lies in order to get you to open up more and to finally try it. And that's when they open the door for all the other ones to just hit you and pound you into the dust. They will shackle you and enslave you to those particular sins. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, then you already know all the stuff that they're gonna do. And what I mean by that is all those things that you feel you need, that you feel like you're trapped by. How do you think you got there? Because that's what these spirits do. They trap you, they enslave you. One of the things that we will take a moment to talk about, a concept that's kind of bizarre to some people, but what some Christian circles refer to as spirit spouses. A lot of lust spirits will oftentimes fulfill this role, where what they will do is, like I said, they don't assign spirits to people very often, not in terms of like, not like other ones where they will like afflict you. What I do mean is that they will assign spirits that will return to you oftentimes in order to propagate more of these lies, to feed on you, to push you more and more. And that's what the spirit spouses ultimately are. They're demons who are assigned to you that are very possessive of you and will aim to kind of try to draw your attention back to them all the time. So you will constantly be having images of this one particular person, for example. Maybe there's somebody that you think is just the most beautiful person in the world, and they're going to draw your mind back to them again and again and again in the most lustful ways possible. And they will, in your mind, in your fantasies, those spirits will take on the role of that person in order to try to maintain you trapped in that thing. And it creates, and the interesting thing about it, you got to understand human psychology on this one. One thing that was found years ago, I remember hearing about this in like the early 2000s, but researchers were studying the actual effect of pornography and even fantasy on human brains. And the reality is that a lot of human brains cannot actually distinguish, like on a subconscious level, we struggle to draw a line between the difference between fantasy and reality. So if your fantasies, if you spend a lot of time fantasizing about specific things, your subconscious treats it as an actual event that has happened. It takes it in. And in a lot of ways, you can be a very sexually experienced person mentally because of the amount of time that you spend fantasizing and how much you involve yourself in that. And it's obscure, but it's there. And this brings us back to the spirit spouses and what they kind of create. And the reason why they do this is because it can create problems with your actual relationships. A lot of people who get married or a lot of a lot of Christian people struggle with marriage after getting together with a spouse. And the reason why this happens is because of that particular thing. Oftentimes Christian men especially, but even Christian women, they have an imagined, a propagated fantasy of their perfect man, of their perfect husband or wife. And as a result, when it comes time to actually like be involved with somebody, they're not imagining an actual person. So when they get together and they find themselves in this relationship, they're now struggling with a lot of things about the realities of living with a person of the opposite sex, or even just the clash of their ideas of what a wife or a husband are supposed to look like, what they're supposed to be, who they're supposed to be. And they keep going back to that imagined version that they've been holding on to this whole time, rather than learning to accept and understand and grow with the person that they have. And a lot of people struggle with this. It's not something that's widely talked about, but it is a common problem in the church. It's kind of a hole in our way of handling relationships as a whole. And it's one that the enemy very easily exploits. This enemy specifically. So the thing about this is that the thing about all of this is that in order to be free of this spirit, there is a place there are places that we need to go, because it's attacking things that are perfectly normal and acceptable. The need to be wanted, the need to be in community, the need for companionship, the need for love. These are perfectly reasonable things that everybody wants, but it's taking those and twisting them, filling our heads with lies. And it doesn't matter what state you're in, because there are lots of different people that this looks like. Those afflicted by spirits of lust, who have been preyed on by them, they're just as much the girl who's sending nudes of herself, or like is completely broken down and doesn't even care anymore. It's not even girl, just person. I've seen plenty of men and women in this state. I've seen plenty of people in this state. Doesn't matter, like gay, straight, everybody. I've seen a lot of different people who are in that broken down state of not caring anymore. They simply lived for the purpose of finding the next high, as it were, the next thing that made them feel good. And that's what their life revolved around, was just, I'm going to, whatever happens, happens. Everything in between those good feelings is it's just extra for their story. They just don't even concern themselves with it. Those are people who have been afflicted by lost spirits. People who are going in secret, hiding their shame as they lock themselves in their bedrooms or their bathrooms and pull up their phone screens and then cry about it afterwards. And because they feel so trapped by this thing that's happening in the dark. And they can't escape it, they can't let it go, and they feel completely overpowered by it, and they hate themselves for it. Those are people afflicted by spirits of lust. Even a lot of trans people, like in the modern state, there are a lot of people who, and it's not even just trans people, it's just they're one of the more like, it's trans people who fall into this category just tend to be some of the more like apparent, but there are lots of people in the modern age now who seek to be gender fluid or whatever. And that again comes down to the same thing of them wanting to be wanted so bad that they think if they become a different person entirely, then they will be wanted finally. And that's at the core of what's driving them, whether that's to transition or to change who they are or to change their appearance. That's at the core of it. They're so desperately needing to be wanting to be wanted, that they will push themselves into those places. And understand, I'm not talking about everybody in those states, but there are a lot, and I know it. I've seen them. I've had talks with them, and they've had to kind of acknowledge that, yeah, that's kind of what's really going on here. Not everybody is cognizant of it. They think it's just normal, because again, most of the things that I've said are lies, are believed to be normal parts of facets of human psychology, and they're not completely. Like, a lot of Freud's arguments for the pertinence of sex in psychology have been like pulled away from because it's been found to be untrue. But a lot of those are like Freudian psychology. But just giving examples, and there are plenty of people as well who are enslaved to this as a result. And I said exploitation was a big part of this, because you have lots of people who are stuck in who are sex trafficking and different things like that, given to prostitution or different things like that, and they're afflicted by these spirits as well. Even in the porn industry, like I said, that is Aphrodite's bread and butter. If Aphrodite is no longer a god at the temple that you go to and you have sex with her prostitutes in order to worship her, well, she moved on and found a new business, as it were, and has been running that very, very well. Even saved some whales at one point. The thing about it is that there is a place for us to find deliverance, and each one of these messages that they may go a little longer, like this one is, and I apologize for that, because an hour is a long time, especially with my kind of droning voice. But there are places for us to be delivered from these spirits and from the attacks of these spirits, and that's ultimately the goal here. So for each one of these messages, I'm going to lay out a prayer that you can follow along with if you wish to. And we don't normally do this. Normally, if we do a special prayer or whatever, we'll do it at the end. We'll do it after with the camera shut off and whatnot, because it just creates an opportunity for people to have those intimate times of breakthrough and deliverance. We don't usually want that out there. But in these instances, there are places for us to be delivered from these spirits, to be free of these things that are afflicting us. So I'll do a guided prayer, and feel free to pray along with it. But in these things, you got to understand that this is one of those ones. There are circumstances where there is a need for sanctification. And sanctification, for those unaware, is just the process that God takes us through, where he works through those mentalities, those lies that we've come to believe, and changes our perspective in order for us to see a grander scheme of things. I can make the argument that those things are lies based off of different cultures that I'm aware of, and how these people live their lives, and how separate from those mentalities they live their lives. You can look around the world and see that this thing that we believe is true isn't true. You can look around the world and see completely functional societies, even thriving societies, who don't obsess over sex, who don't obsess over validation in those kinds of ways. But as a Christian, as one who has been close to God so many times, I can tell you straight up, there's a reason why I have like a backlog of years of messages talking about identity, because that's been the thing that God has had me on for years. And Aphrodite is one, spirits of lust are ones who attack your identity. They try to tell you you're not good enough because you don't have these things, or you don't have experience here, or you're not open to this, or you need to try this to be good enough. They're ones who oftentimes attack this particular thing. It's why I've had to deal with them so many times on a personal level, or on a level of being a minister, casting them off of people or talking people through these things, because they're there all the time. They pop in and out. They never linger. They just pop in, they spread their lie, they give you your temptation, and then they bounce out to go to the next person because they don't care. They're not committed. So, in lieu of all of that being said, I don't know who's watching this, but I would love to see you free of the spirit. And you're here, you poor soul. But this is the prayer. And again, like, this may require sanctification. This may require time where God, like, talks you through these things. Why do you feel that you need this in order to be wanted? You're surrounded by people who love you. I want you. I love you. God, specifically. Because in the end, like, nobody has illustrated a greater desire for us than Jesus. Like, the whole thing where he died and was resurrected was a unique kind of love letter to us, in him saying, I will go this far. Like, God, that's literally God saying, I will die for you, and then actually doing it as much as he can in order to show you how much he loves, cares, and wants you. So there is a place for us to accept that and to have that be enough. It will never be completely enough. Understand me. Like, I'm not going to, like, disregard everything I've just said about the natural needs of human beings to find companionship, to find love, to be wanted. That's all there. But there are places where God can fill those holes, so the sting isn't as bad as it so often is made to feel by these spirits who tell us that it hurts and make it hurt. So, to go through the prayer and close out this message, for those who want to be free of these spirits, I want you to understand me very clearly. Take time with this. Think about it. In any of these messages, I will say the same thing, but this one especially. You need to make a decision about what you actually want here, whether you want it or not, whether you want to be free of it or not, because some of you don't. Some of you actually do not want freedom from this because it feels good. And that is a whole thing. Like, there is a place for you to ask God to change your heart. That's something that you can do. That's something that you can absolutely have. And he can do that. He can help you to be free of these things by helping you want to be free of these things. But for those who do and are tired of becoming open to these things, or tired of being shackled to a quiet sin that they feel powerless in the face of, then here's our prayer. Holy Spirit, I disavow any and all relationship to and with any spirits of lust, or Aphrodite herself, or those other named spirits who are part of her kind. I break that relationship because I don't want it. I want more. Jesus, Forgive me for where I have accepted this in place of real relationship, where I have accepted lies telling me that I'm not good enough, lies telling me that I need vain things or lustful things in order to be a meaningful person. And I acknowledge that you showed me that I was good enough when you died for me. So please, Lord, free me from these spirits. Free me from their temptations. Free me from their lies. Show me the truth of who I am. And show me your heart for me. Show me how good you think I am. Please show me how much I mean to you. And love me, Lord. Please let me feel your love. Let me know you love me on a personal level. And that would be it. And I would add this part as the pastor, I guess, of this community. By the authority of Jesus Christ, I rebuke the spirits of Aphrodite and lust who have been attacking and assaulting those who have prayed this prayer. I rebuke them and cast them off. And God, I pray a spirit of protection over them, and I pray that your spirit would be on them day and night as you teach them who they really are. And Lord, let them feel your love. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
And that's what I've got.